As thunder rolled over the waves of Lake Michigan in September 1679, a pioneering ship named Lrifon vanished into history. This was no ordinary vessel. It was the first full-sized sailing ship ever to ply the upper Great Lakes, built by the ambitious French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle. Loaded with valuable furs and a crew of 6 for her return journey, Lrifon set out from a remote island trading post with a favorable wind, only to disappear without a trace. In the blink of an eye, the Great Lakes' first great ship became its first great mystery. For more than 3 centuries since, historians, divers, and dreamers have wondered what happened to Lrifon. After all, a 45-ton bark, armed with cannons, vanishing without a trace in the wilderness of the Great Lakes, is a highly unusual event. La Salle was a man with a plan, and in the late 1670s, this French explorer envisioned establishing a fur trade empire and finding a water route to China via the elusive Northwest Passage. To achieve these ambitious goals, he needed more than canoes. He needed a ship to navigate the Great Lakes and carry large cargoes of pelts and supplies. So, in 1679, deep in the Niagara wilderness above the falls, La Salle oversaw the construction of a 45-ton vessel he christened Lrifon. And yeah, I'm going to let you take an educated guess as to what mythical creature he named the ship after. Built from local timber and fitted with 7 cannons, it was by far the largest ship the region had ever seen, astonishing the Native American tribes who watched this fortress take shape. La Salle launched Lrifon on the upper Niagara River in the summer of 1679, marking the beginning of the end of the dominance of canoes in the Great Lakes. His ship, the first of its kind to sail beyond Niagara Falls, embarked with a crew of 32 men and a Jesuit priest, Father Louis Hennepin, aboard as chronicler. They traversed Lake Erie, navigated up the Detroit and St. Clair rivers into Lake Huron, and pressed onward into the uncharted waters of Lake Michigan. By the time Lrifon reached the far end of Lake Michigan, it had proved that large vessels could operate in these waters, eventually paving the way for future ships and settlements in the region. La Salle's expedition reached its furthest point at a small island at the entrance of Green Bay on Lake Michigan in early September 1679. There, the French crew met with the Potawatomi people who had amassed a huge stockpile of pelts in anticipation of Lrifon's arrival. La Salle decided to continue exploring inland, but he sent Lrifon back east to deliver the valuable cargo. On September 18th, 1679, after riding out a gale for 4 days at anchor, the ship's pilot and 5 crew set sail from the island bound for the Niagara River. The ship was loaded down with an estimated 12,000 pounds of furs, an amount that was intended to pay off La Salle's massive debts. As La Salle watched her disappear over the horizon, he never imagined it would be the last time he saw his groundbreaking ship. Not long after leaving the sheltered harbor, Lrifon sailed straight into a brewing storm over Lake Michigan. Local Potawatomi observers had warned the crew that a storm was coming and urged them not to depart. According to legend, the crew informed them that, quote, "A griffin does not fear the wind," a quote which was almost certainly added later for dramatic flair. Once out in open water, legend claims that the vessel met the full fury of the gale. Father Hennepin, the Jesuit priest, later wrote that the ship was tossed by violent winds and then simply vanished, possibly swallowed by the waves. However, he wasn't a personal witness to the event, and his source appears to be his own speculation combined with the accounts of native witnesses. These witnesses didn't actually see what happened to the ship, however, but rather, at best, they saw it leave in a storm. La Salle, waiting in vain for his ship's return, realized by late November that it was hopelessly overdue and likely lost. According to some accounts, he sent out a search party which found scraps of wreckage from a wooden ship. Given that his ship was the only old-world European-style sailing ship in that part of the Great Lakes ever, if this account is true, this confirmed his worst fears. The sudden disappearance of Lrifon spawned countless theories. With no survivors to tell the tale, people filled the void with speculation. The most notable theory is that it simply sank in a storm, and there's some circumstantial evidence to support this. However, Salle himself began to believe that something entirely different happened. Salle grew convinced that his ship didn't sink by accident but was sabotaged. In a 1683 letter, he expressed his belief that the Griffon's pilot and crew might have intentionally scuttled the ship and ran off with the furs. According to this theory, the mutineers' plan unraveled when they were allegedly captured by native bands before they could get far. However, no concrete proof of a mutiny ever emerged, and Salle himself would perish a few years later before the matter could be fully investigated. Another story claims that a band of warriors of the Ottawa tribe boarded the Griffon at anchor, eliminated the crew, looted the cargo, and burned the ship. This tale was recorded years later by a French missionary, but based on hearsay, and even he doubted its veracity. This missionary may have believed that the man who was telling him this story was trying to win French support against the Ottawa for secondary gain. That is to say, the French missionary thought that this individual was simply making the story up to further his own cause, or the cause of his tribe. No direct evidence has ever surfaced that any tribe attacked the ship, and no native oral histories have been connected to such an incident. Notably, if the incident did occur and these warriors were able to get their hands on 12,000 pounds of furs, this story would almost certainly have been repeated for generations. Despite these tales, no conclusive evidence has ever emerged to pinpoint Lriffon's exact fate. The ship's end remains an open question, though most scholars still lean toward the storm on Lake Michigan as the most plausible culprit. The ship's elusive wreck has become legendary among shipwreck hunters. Since the 19th century, over 20 claims have surfaced from various corners of Lakes Michigan and Huron, each purporting to have found the long-lost vessel. Old timbers on a beach here, a mysterious hull there, yet each time, inspection proved it was another ship or lacked any definitive link to Salle's ship. Searchers have continued to hunt for the ship up until the present day, though no site has ever been definitively linked to the wreck. It's easy to think of a sea monster as something sudden, a fleeting shape in a blurry photograph, a single terrifying breach of the waves, and then gone. But what happens when one comes to stay and set up a little cute home base in a bustling American harbor? That's exactly what happened in the summer of 1817 in Gloucester, Massachusetts, creating one of the most credible and intensely scrutinized sea monster stories in history. Long before the summer of 1817, whispers of a great serpent already haunted the rocky coast of Cape Ann. The earliest documented account comes from 1638, when the English traveler John Josselyn wrote of a creature seen by both English settlers and local indigenous people. They described a massive snake that coiled up upon the rocks on occasion. Crucially, Josselyn noted that the indigenous guides warned the Englishmen against shooting it, believing that if the beast weren't slain outright, it would attack and endanger all their lives. By 1817, Gloucester was one of America's oldest seaports, a town whose identity was forged on the waves of the North Atlantic. Its citizens were fishermen, mariners, and whalers, experts who could read the water like a book and identify its inhabitants at a glance. Their livelihoods depended on not being fooled by tricks of light or odd-looking waves. This context is what makes the story so compelling. When these men began reporting something they couldn't explain, it carried more weight than a usual tall tale. The first reports in early August 1817 were met with the expected ridicule. The skipper of a vessel reported seeing a 60-foot serpent at the harbor's entrance, an observation that was treated as a joke at the time. But the laughter didn't last long, and on August 10th, the woodpeckers of truth began to peck apart the dam of disbelief. Mariner Amos Story watched the creature from shore for over an hour, noting its head resembled a sea turtle. That same day, another resident saw what she thought was a log on an island, only to watch in shock as it moved on its own. The sightings intensified, and from August 12th to 14th, respected shipmaster Solomon Allen III observed the creature from his boat. He described a head as large as a horse's, a body with up to 50 distinct humps, and an incredible speed, estimating it could travel a mile in under 3 minutes. On August 14th, with crowds of curious onlookers lining the shore, the creature put on a show. The day's most dramatic encounter belonged to Matthew Gaffney, a ship carpenter who got within 30 feet of the animal. He described its head as the size of a keg, and its body as thick as a barrel, moving with a bizarre vertical motion. Gaffney did the natural thing and pulled out his musket and started blasting, but this seemed to have no effect, and the creature resurfaced a safe distance away. By mid-August, sea serpent mania had fully gripped the town. Sightings became a daily event, so common that some residents brought out chairs to watch the spectacle. Newspapers up and down the coast started spreading the tale far and wide. An arriving ship, unwarned of the harbor's new resident, reportedly saw the creature, turned, and fled in terror. The phenomenon didn't end with that summer, and the creature, or one just like it, returned in 1818 and again in 1819, with hundreds more witnessing it off a nearby coast. The sheer volume and duration of the sightings made it impossible to dismiss as a simple mistake. From the dozens of sworn testimonies, a remarkably consistent portrait of the creature emerged. Witnesses consistently placed its length between 60 and 100 feet, with a body as thick as a barrel. The head, often held several feet above the water, was compared to that of a horse, a sea turtle, or a large snake. It was described as dark and smooth, with no visible scales. But the creature's most defining characteristic was its body and motion. It was dark brown or black and appeared to be segmented, like a line of barrels floating in the water. This gave it a lumpy, jointed appearance, and this visual was directly linked to its unique method of propulsion. It moved in a vertical, undulating way that witnesses repeatedly likened to a caterpillar crawling. This detail is particularly significant, as known marine animals generally move with a horizontal side-to-side action. The consistent reporting of a completely different, almost unnatural form of movement suggests that the witnesses were observing a real and singular phenomenon. It moved with astonishing speed, far faster than a whale, but was also seen resting placidly on the surface, seemingly indifferent to the commotion it was causing. The news from Gloucester electrified Boston's intellectual elite, particularly the members of the fledgling Linnaean Society of New England. Formed in 1814, this ambitious group of doctors, lawyers, and other men of learning saw a golden opportunity. In a scientific world completely dominated by Europe, discovering and classifying a creature of this magnitude would be a monumental achievement for American science. Properly classifying this monster, which was entirely unknown to science, would be a massive boost to the new nation's scientific prestige. On August 18, 1817, they formed a committee to launch the first ever formal scientific investigation of a sea serpent. Their approach was impressively methodical. They developed a 25-point questionnaire and enlisted a local justice of the peace to collect sworn legal affidavits from eyewitnesses. They treated the investigation like a court case, believing that the path to scientific truth lay in establishing the credibility of human testimony. Witnesses were questioned separately to prevent their stories from influencing one another, and they were asked about everything from the creature's speed to the existence of gills. Then came the breakthrough they'd been hoping for. On September 27th, a strange 3-foot-long black snake was found and eliminated. Its most peculiar feature was a series of distinct humps along its spine. In the charged atmosphere, the conclusion seemed obvious. It had to be a baby sea serpent. The society, desperate for physical proof, seized upon this discovery. They declared the specimen the progeny of the great serpent and gave the new genus a formal Latin name, Scoliophus atlanticus, the Atlantic humped snake. This very scientific-sounding creature was rushed to market, and for a brief moment, the Linnaean Society were heroes. The carcass of Scoliophus atlanticus was even put on public display in Philadelphia, and it was presented not as a sideshow, but as a legitimate scientific find. America finally had its very own discovery from the natural world that could rival anything European scientists were classifying. But the triumph was short-lived. A trained French naturalist, Alexandre Lesueur, got a look at the specimen. With an expert's eye for comparative anatomy, he saw it not as a new marine marvel, but as something tragically mundane. It was a common eastern racer snake that had been afflicted with spinal deformities caused by tumors. The revelation was a public relations catastrophe, and the Linnaean Society was humiliated, with its scientific credibility shattered overnight. The entire affair was immediately rebranded the Gloucester hoax, and the Society's embarrassing mistake gave skeptics all the ammunition they needed. The Society quietly disbanded in 1822, its name forever tied to this failure. Herein lies the central tragedy of the Gloucester serpent story. The debunking of the deformed snake proved only that the Society had misidentified a land animal. It did absolutely nothing to explain what hundreds of people had witnessed in the harbor for weeks. But the spectacular nature of the scientific error poisoned the well, and the small deformed snake became a wider explanation for why the whole thing was fake. Despite this so-called debunking, curious minds have continued to ask what the serpent was for over 200 years. Early skeptics suggested mistaken identity, ranging from a line of dolphins, a large basking shark, or a pod of seals. Yet the witnesses, most of whom were professional mariners, consistently rejected these explanations. More recently, a far more elegant and scientifically grounded explanation has emerged. This theory reframes the entire event not as a monster hunt, but as an environmental tragedy. The story begins with a global catastrophe, the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, which led to 1816's Year Without a Summer. The resulting crop failures and collapse of traditional fisheries in New England forced a massive, desperate shift to different kinds of fishing. This meant the sudden deployment of vast amounts of fishing gear, ropes, nets, and the wooden kegs used as floats into coastal waters. This theory decodes the mystery with stunning clarity. The bizarre descriptions suddenly make perfect sense. The line of barrels observed wasn't the creature's back. It was literally a line of wooden fishing floats trailing behind it. The strange vertical motion wasn't a biological function. Rather, it was the desperate, unnatural struggling of a large fish, hopelessly entangled in ropes and debris. The head held out of the water could have been the animal's actual head, or a fluke or fin caught up in the gear. Of course, this theory still fails to account for how so many hardy seamen couldn't distinguish barrels from a biological entity. One possible explanation for the Gloucester serpent lies not in biology, but in psychology. The summer of 1817 was a moment of heightened tension, coming just after the year without a summer, when food shortages and economic stress weighed heavily on coastal communities. In such conditions, the sudden appearance of something strange in the harbor could ignite a powerful cycle of suggestion and belief. Once the first credible witness spoke out, others may have unconsciously reinforced the story through their own observations, fitting what they saw into the growing narrative. This is the essence of mass hysteria, shared expectation shaping perception. In Gloucester, the serpent might not have been a monster at all, but a mirror of collective anxiety projected onto the waves. Ultimately, whatever this sea monster was remains an unsolved mystery, and new hypotheses are constantly being produced to try to explain what it actually was. On the morning of March 10th, 1959, a shocking discovery in a Tokyo river set off one of Japan's most infamous unsolved cases. The body of 27-year-old Tomoko Takakawa, a stewardess for British Overseas Airways Corporation, was found floating face up near a bridge in the Zenpukuji River in Suganami Ward. Born around 1932 in Ashiya City in Hyogo Prefecture, she was raised as part of the country's Catholic minority. And trust me when I say that this factor will be important, so keep it in mind. After high school, she moved to Tokyo to attend the Seibo Junior College of Nursing, a school run by Catholic officials, and later worked back in her hometown as a nurse. Takakawa even became engaged, but her parents did not approve of the marriage, leading her to return to Tokyo for a fresh start. There she took a job at St. Adelia's nursery in Nakano Ward, staying connected to the Catholic community in the city. Ambitious and seeking a new career path, Tomoko set her sights on the burgeoning airline industry. Her uncle worked for British Overseas Airways, and through a process in late 1958, she succeeded in being hired as a flight attendant. In fact, Takakawa was one of only 8 Japanese women selected out of 300 applicants. She was thus among the first group of Japanese stewardesses for the prestigious international airline. She underwent training in London and returned to Tokyo on February 27, 1959, preparing for her first assignment. That first scheduled flight was to be on the Tokyo-Hong Kong route on March 13, 1959. Unfortunately, Tomoko Takakawa would never make that flight. Just days before her official debut, she disappeared and was soon found to have become the victim of a heinous crime. Tomoko Takakawa was last seen alive on Sunday, March 8, 1959. That morning she attended Mass, as she did regularly as a devout Catholic. She then had lunch at her uncle's home near the church. Around 3 p.m., she told family she was going to attend a friend's birthday party in the Ushigomi area of Shinjuku Ward. After that, Tomoko never returned. When she failed to show up for work or home, concern grew. 2 days later, on March 10th, a male office worker spotted something suspicious floating in the shallow Zenpukuji River in western Tokyo. Upon closer examination, he realized that this was a body and alerted the authorities immediately. Police arrived and identified the body as Tomoko Takakawa after finding several of her personal belongings scattered on the riverbank nearby. At first, investigators considered the possibility of an accident, or that the act was committed intentionally, since there were no obvious external wounds on the body. However, an autopsy at Keio University Hospital quickly dispelled those notions. The medical examiner found only a small amount of water in Takakawa's lungs, indicating she had not died by drowning. Instead, subtle marks around her neck suggested she was strangled. In other words, Tomoko had likely been slain before being placed in the water. The autopsy also uncovered forensic evidence. traces of evidence from 2 different men were found on her body. This discovery prompted police to broaden their inquiry and seek out information on all the men in Tomoko's recent life. Very quickly, one name emerged as a focal point of the investigation. One of the first major leads came from Tomoko Takekawa's personal notebook and her activities in the days before her death. Investigators discovered the name Father Louis Charles Vermeersch, written in her notebook. Vermeersch was a 38-year-old Catholic priest from Belgium who had been living in Tokyo since 1948. At the time, he worked as head of accounting at a Catholic publishing house affiliated with a church in Suganami Ward, the same ward where Tomoko's body was found. Police learned that on March 7th, just a day before Tomoko vanished, a special delivery parcel from that Catholic publisher had arrived at the airline dormitory where she lived. Investigators believed this package contained a letter from Father Vermeersch requesting to meet with Tomoko. In fact, Tomoko was reportedly carrying that very letter when she left for the birthday party on March 8th. But when her body was recovered 2 days later, the letter was missing. This strongly suggested she did go to meet the priest on the day she disappeared, and that the letter might have been taken by whoever ended her. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Father Vermeersch soon became the prime person of interest in the case. The Catholic priest voluntarily cooperated with police questioning, though the situation was delicate. In April 1959, rumors swirled that the priest had fled Japan. But in reality, he agreed to multiple interrogation sessions in Tokyo. He was accompanied by a Vatican representative and a lawyer sent to protect his rights. A veteran detective, famed for tackling high-profile cases, led the questioning. During these interviews, Father Vermeersch admitted that he had met with Tomoko and even took her to a hotel in the Harajuku area of Tokyo on March 5th, just days before her disappearance. He insisted that the hotel visit was for a quote-unquote consultation, which unsurprisingly raised major red flags for investigators. Despite his denials, police grew convinced that Tomoko and the priest had in fact had relations contrary to his clerical vows. Evidence surfaced indicating they had been in a relationship even before she landed the stewardess job in late 1958. This contradicted the priest's claims of a purely pastoral or platonic connection. Several other findings bolstered the suspicions around Father Vermeersch. Witnesses came forward with a number of intriguing statements. A female employee at a small, seedy hotel on Takeshita Street in Harajuku recalled seeing a foreign man check in around March 5th. This was a notable event at the time, since foreign visitors were rare in that area. When shown a photograph of Father Vermeersch, she confirmed he was the foreign guest she had seen at the hotel. This corroborated the priest's own admission that he had been with Tomoko at a hotel that week, suggesting a secret meeting. A resident living near the bridge where Tomoko's corpse was discovered reported noticing a white sedan parked by the riverside around 5 a.m. on March 10th. Father Vermeersch happened to drive a white Renault sedan, again raising concerns amongst investigators. When police showed this witness a catalog of car models, she pointed to a Renault identical to the one the priest drove. Investigators later heard that the priest had the tires on his car replaced soon after the incident. This is a detail some found suspicious, as if he might have been trying to erase evidence related to potential tire tracks. Tomoko's autopsy revealed her last meal had been a Chinese-style dinner consumed not long before her death. Among the contents of her stomach were mushrooms cut in a distinctive manner. Police traced these to a canned food product sold at a shop outside a local train station and found a clerk who remembered selling them to a man resembling Father Vermeersch. And personally, something about this aspect of the investigation seems, to phrase it delicately, a bit too perfect. To recognize the specific cut of a specific mushroom and then tie it back to a specific store and then get the guy to say the priest bought it is a little too CSI for me. Investigators also looked into Father Vermeersch's reputation and behavior. Detectives learned that the priest had a history of getting overly familiar with women working at the Catholic nursery where Tomoko had been employed. According to media reports, he was seen embracing female staff and even allegedly doing much more with some of the young women. These accusations of impropriety cast a shadow on his character and made the idea of a secret affair with Tomoko more plausible. Despite this array of circumstantial evidence, there were challenges in building a solid case. Father Vermeersch maintained his innocence and was never formally charged with any crime. He had alibis for the critical time frame around March 8th to 10th, claiming he was elsewhere when Tomoko went missing and when her body was dumped. However, all his alibi witnesses were fellow clergy or church associates, which made police skeptical of their objectivity. That said, he was a Catholic priest, so the fact that for a short period of time, all his close associates who could vouch for him were Catholics is perhaps not that suspicious. By April 1959, inside information on the investigation had leaked to the public, and attention on Father Vermeersch intensified. On April 12th, a television program on NHK called Japan Unmasked even showed the priest's portrait photo pinned up at an immigration office. Other news outlets quickly picked up the story. The sensational nature of the crime made headlines, and public sentiment began to turn against the foreign priest. The Catholic Church in Japan, however, closed ranks in support of Father Vermeersch. He never made any public statements himself, but church officials spoke on his behalf. Maximilian von Furstenberg, the Vatican ambassador to Japan at the time, gave a comment declaring his solemn conviction that the priest was fully innocent. This public defense highlighted the sensitive diplomatic and religious dimensions of the case. Internationally, the handling of the investigation drew some criticism as well. News of the case made significant waves in America as well. In early June 1959, Congressman Frank Boe stood before the U.S. House of Representatives and read aloud an English-language editorial from a Japanese newspaper. The writer noted that the priest had been hounded publicly by the police for weeks on end and effectively had his reputation ruined without ever being charged with a crime. The congressman echoed the article's concern that a man could be subjected to intense suspicion in the press with no recourse since no formal charges were filed. Notably, just 6 months after the crime, a movie was released depicting the priest slaying Tomoko, capturing popular sentiment at the time. This movie was sensationalistic and extremely popular, but was pulled from theaters after it caused an international incident and concern from both Japanese Catholics and church officials. Over the years, several theories have been proposed to explain who ended Tomoko Takekawa and why, though none have been proven. The primary theory during the initial investigation was that Father Vermeersch was indeed the perpetrator, acting either out of passion, panic, or some other personal motive. Perhaps Tomoko wanted to end the relationship or threatened to expose it, leading the priest to commit extreme violence against her. This theory casts the crime as a tragic culmination of an illicit romance, and it was reinforced by the various witness accounts tying the priest to Tomoko's last known activities. However, lacking a confession or definitive proof, alternative theories have also emerged. One major line of speculation involves criminal smuggling as a motive. In late 1960, a Japanese mystery writer, Seicho Matsumoto, published a novel titled Black Gospel, loosely based on the Takekawa case. In Matsumoto's fictional retelling, the priest character enlists the flight attendant to help smuggle illicit substances, and he ultimately has to silence her permanently. This imaginative theory introduced the idea that Tomoko's slaying might have been connected to some trade using airline staff as couriers. Interestingly, around that same time, the airline she had worked for was dealing with very real-life smuggling issues among its employees. In 1960, a gold smuggling scandal was uncovered that led to 27 employees being dismissed for their involvement. Tomoko had been scheduled to work the Tokyo-Hong Kong flight, a route that, as later reports noted, was a known corridor for smugglers in the week of her slaying. This coincidence led some to wonder if she might have stumbled onto a smuggling operation or been recruited to participate in one. Another unresolved question that feeds various theories is the presence of DNA from a second man on Tomoko's body. Police never identified who the second individual was or whether he had any role in the crime. This opens the door to theories that perhaps someone else, possibly a different lover or an unknown assailant, was with Tomoko around the time of her death. If Father Vermeersch was innocent, the real perpetrator could have been this other man whose biological evidence was found. Was Tomoko seeing another man, or had she been assaulted by someone other than the priest? Unfortunately, the investigation didn't publicly pursue any specific alternate suspect, which, given the evidence which was found on her, sounds fairly negligent. Some critics have wondered if the focus on the foreign priest caused authorities and media to overlook other leads or potential Japanese suspects. Given the lack of information on any other persons of interest, the identity and involvement of the second man remains a mystery within the wider mystery. By June 1959, after months of enduring suspicion, Father Vermeersch took the opportunity to leave Japan. On June 10, 1959, 3 days before he was due for a sixth round of police questioning, he appeared at Haneda Airport seeking to depart the country. Alerted by immigration officials, police officials debated what to do. In the end, because there was no arrest warrant or charges filed, they had no legal grounds to hold him. The priest was permitted to board an Air France flight out of Japan the next day, June 11th. Before departure, a reporter on the same plane got a brief comment from Vermeersch. He said the church had ordered him back to Belgium and that he wished to see his aging parents, but he professed willingness to cooperate with Japanese authorities. Once he left, however, he never returned to Japan, and he never further cooperated with Japanese officials. The departure of the primary suspect caused an uproar in Japan. Father Vermeersch settled overseas, in eastern Canada by 1960, and lived out the rest of his long life quietly. In March 2017, he passed away at the age of 96 in New Brunswick, Canada. Unsurprisingly, his obituary in a local Canadian newspaper made no mention of the Tomoko Takakawa case, reflecting perhaps that he was never officially charged or convicted of anything. After years of investigation without resolution, police formally closed the case on March 10, 1974, exactly 15 years after Tomoko Takakawa's slaying. Under Japanese law at the time, the statute of limitations for the crime was 15 years, meaning that by that date, no one could be charged even if new evidence emerged. The case was labeled unsolved, and the files were shelved. In the decades since, no conclusive new evidence has come to light that would identify the perpetrator or perpetrators. The physical evidence collected was never matched to a perpetrator, and it's unclear if it's still available given the fact that the case was closed. In my view, the initial investigation into Tomoko Takakawa's case was severely compromised by tunnel vision, intense media scrutiny, and international pressure, resulting in critical missteps. Police quickly fixated on Vermeersch due to his controversial relationship with Tomoko, neglecting other significant leads. The most obvious of these leads is the evidence from the second unidentified male found on her body. Evidence was mishandled or ignored, potential witnesses inadequately questioned, and the focus on the priest overshadowed other credible theories. With Vermeersch's departure from Japan, crucial investigative momentum dissipated, ensuring key evidence vanished and leaving enduring doubts. In my view, Due to these fundamental investigative errors, the identity of the perpetrator will remain forever uncertain. That said, maybe this didn't fully come down to investigative errors, but also high-level political intervention.